Good evening, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. And I would like to apologize for using the name Bokeh Boomer in the title. It's a joke name I came up with once. It sort of struck me in the middle of the night, and I thought, what a great name across social media for a photographer. But this is, in fact, first-person shooter. I'm Rodney Brown. I am the editor-in-chief of Nerd Caliber, first-person shooter on Facebook as the cosplay photographer that some of you know. I'm going to wait for Jesus. Bad cosplay check. Okay. Whatever that means. Welcome to the show, Jesus. I'm going to wait for a minute or two before I start getting into sort of the script and the images that are examples of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. But I can say, so of course, this is a flash unit. If you use a DSLR or a mirrorless interchangeable lens camera with a hot shoe on the top, you probably have something like this. Ideally, it has a tilt and swivel head in which you can move it around. And that's pretty important in what we're talking about tonight. Bounce flash photography for cosplay, usually in convention situations. Tammy, welcome to the show. And I'm glad you agree about whatever it is I said, because I said a lot of things already, so I don't know, but cool, thanks. So the reason you use bounce flash is the same reason you use any way to modify the light coming out of your flash. You do this, you aim it at the subject, and that's a really harsh light. There's a little bit of a diffuser built right into the face of this thing, but not much. Now you can modify that light. You can diffuse it a little bit with the things that are usually in most flashes. Colin, welcome to the show. You can use, well, now I've done that, I won't be able to get it back out again. So you can use this little diffuser panel that usually just pops right out, or you can use one of these bounce cards, which is built into the flash, or a bigger bounce card that you just tape to the back of the flash. Those are easy ways to modify. Why did my color change? Anyway, those are easy ways to modify the light coming out of here. That's still not going to really soften it up a whole lot. So some people use these box diffusers. They just go right on top. They clip on top of your flash. That gives you, this much softer light. I will often, if I'm doing that, I will combine it with the diffuser panel and the box, and that'll give you an even softer light. But even that's not a whole lot. That will still create a pretty flat, harsh light. Iobra, Sombria? Hoping I'm saying that right. Okay, and okay. But you still want to diffuse the light more, which is why people will do things like put soft boxes, octagonal soft boxes on their flashes. If you're using an umbrella, like I do at a lot of cons, you'll see me use either a bounce or a shoot-through umbrella. If it's a bounce umbrella, basically all I'm doing is I'm pointing this thing into the umbrella where the reflective surface is on the inside, and that gives me a great scattering of the light. Instead of coming as a beam directly out of here, it's scattering in all sorts of directions and hitting the subject. You get softer shadows, you get more pleasant light. Bouncing off an available surface, like a ceiling or these walls are currently blue and red, but they're white. I mean, I've got really just white walls and white ceiling, which is why they can take these color washes really nicely. Bouncing off a ceiling or a wall like that will give you 12 feet by 10 feet or whatever it is of reflective, diffusive surface. Villain Bakugo, welcome to the show. Colin, you're a big fan. Sorry, I don't know why you're sorry you're a big fan. I'm glad you're a big fan. Villain Bakugo, I'm really into photography and I love doing photo shoots at cons. I hope I can help you learn something that will make your con experience even more fun. So if you're shooting against a surface like that, again, you've got all that surface area, and that's going to scatter the light like crazy. It's going to make the shadows softer. Now, you can shoot against something really large but a flat surface like a reflector. You know, if using natural light and you use one of those big unfoldable reflectors, it's got a white side and often a reflective silver side. Use the white side and you bounce a flash off that, which I've done a number of times. You can get a decent softer light. And our first example is of that actually happening. So this is Kristen Huey, the wonderful Kristen Huey, taken at MegaCon in Orlando in 2014. Without going into a whole lot of detail about what this is, SGH Photo Art, who's a wonderful guy, studio setup that he had there on the floor. I walked up to him to say hi. He told me if I wanted to shoot in the studio, that's great. He'd let me borrow all of his lights. At the time, I had just started playing with studio lights. I said, you know what? You got this big white reflector just sitting here. I'm going to put it up against this wall, and I'm going to just bounce my flash. I was sitting on my camera, so I'm going to bounce my flash off that reflector and get that reflected light to hit the cosplayers. Now, one of the problems with the way I was doing this is that this was on camera. So I had the flash mounted right on the top of my camera. And what that meant was the flash was firing almost directly 90 degrees horizontally. Rodimus Prime, hello. Welcome to the show. Mori-chan, welcome to the show. That was firing almost directly at the reflector. The reflector was perfectly vertically up and down. So the light was bouncing directly back at the cosplayer. And you can see in the shadows of the jacket on Kristen's shoulders, it's a flat side light. Ideally, that reflector would have been elevated up and angled down slightly, and I would have been shooting up into it to get a downward, softer light. But I didn't have that option. It was where it was in SGH's setup. It still gives me better light than if I was just shooting straight on at the cosplayer. It would have been flat and really direct. Michael, welcome to the show. Kakyoween, welcome to the show. So you can use a big reflector, and that will, as you can see, certainly soften up the light, even though the shadows, if it's directly a 90-degree shot, aren't going to be in the most ideal location. But you can use anything, and this I think is my favorite anything shot. So this is a good friend of mine who is really into making historically accurate costumes as a member of the Society for Creative Anachronism. And they wanted to do a shoot somewhere outside, and at that time, this was 3 years ago, I think, I knew of a nice little waterfall park in Ashby, I think, or Ashburnham, in Massachusetts. Wolf, thank you. I'm glad you like the videos. But it was still winter, and it was still relatively cold, so the little waterfall was completely frozen. So we went there and we did some really good shots, but the sun was coming in and out, and by the time the sun came out, it was behind the hill that is behind the cosplayer that you can see in the background. And so I said, you know what? And this is one of those instances where instead of using on-camera or off-camera on a light stand, I was using the off-camera human light stand. So the cosplayer's partner had my flash, and I said to the cosplayer, I'm going to have you stand as close to the waterfall as you can, but still being safe, standing on a rock at this point. And I told their partner, I'm going to have you stand as close to the waterfall as you can and still be safe. I'm going to crank the flash up to full power, and you just aim it right at that big sheet of white ice. And the light bounced off all of that white reflectiveness and swept, as you can see, it's sweeping across the cosplayer's face. But I'm still getting the ambient light, and it's exposed mainly for the ambient light around the cosplayer. So I set the exposure as though I was shooting outside in shaded light. And then all of that flash, soft flash light, is a wonderful fill coming into the front and the side of her face, or their face. So You can use anything to reflect off of if it's close enough and your flash is powerful enough and the setting works. In this case, the setting worked. One of the other reasons why you would want to use a bounce flash as opposed to some other technique is that it really works well for groups. So this was taken at Super Mega Fest, Sheraton, Framingham in Massachusetts, in Framingham, Mass. And it's one of my absolute favorite locations to do bounce flash because directly behind me, where I'm sitting, is about a 6-foot wide white partition wall that goes up to the ceiling. The ceiling's only about 10 feet. Behind the cosplayers is always this slightly reflective black cutout partition that separates the seating lounge area that I'm in from the dining area behind it. So you've got interesting lighting through that with the ceiling light pieces that are hanging down. You've got that wonderful geometric shape behind them that also reflects a little bit of the light. And you've got this low ceiling and wall directly behind me, so the light can bounce off the ceiling and a little bit off the wall. So it does come to the cosplayer's face a little bit directly, but it's mostly from above. And you can see that in the shadows under Joy's face. So Wonka is our team member and my assistant editor, Wonder Llama Photography and Wonder Llama Cosplay. The Oompa Loompa is the wonderful Minnie Mal Cosplay. Cowboy Hat is Wiley's Misfit Toys. And I can't remember the name of the character that's behind Minnie Mal, but that's that. I don't know if they still have or she still has her page, but it was the Amazing Joy on Facebook. Jenna, hey, welcome to the show. So you can see the shadows. In fact, because of beards and other things, it's the only place you can see the shadows under Joy's chin. It's fairly soft. There's no like super harsh dark shadow there, so it's indicating that some of the light is scattering on that back wall behind me and coming forward, but most of it is coming from above and essentially right over, slightly in front of my head. So I've got the flash angled in such a way that it's bouncing, let's see, towards them, slightly toward them. Let me do it this way. So I would be very slightly angled like so, and it's bouncing up onto the ceiling. Because it's a white ceiling and it's pretty low, some of that is then scattering back to the wall behind me. Most of it is coming down onto the cosplayers. The reason this works well for a group is that even if you have a modifier, even if you have a pretty big modifier, an umbrella, shoot-through umbrella, or a softbox or whatever, there's always going to be a hotter spot in the center and a pretty rapid fall-off of light to the sides. In this case, the only fall-off in the light is you can see that Joy and Minnie Mal are slightly more exposed. There's a little bit more light getting to their faces than Wonder Llama and the others in the back. But not by much. That's only because they're a little bit closer to where the flash is picking up off of the wall. Excuse me. Off of the wall behind me, that they're a little bit closer to that part of the light that's coming onto them. But if you're shooting large groups, if you can find a spot where you can bounce off of a ceiling, that is much better lighting than you could ever get with any kind of flash, even with a big modifier aiming directly at the subjects. So it's one of the reasons why I like it. Now, people who know me as a cosplay photographer knows that one of the other reasons that I like it is that I can take my camera off the flash, put it on a light stand, put it in a spot, and sit there at a high traffic spot and just pick cosplayers as they go by, or people who know me come to find me. That's not necessarily always going to be the case, and it certainly wasn't for me when I was just starting out. So there are some other examples of that that'll be coming up of when it works really well when you're wandering about, and I'll show you some of those. Which gets to the two different ways you can use it, which is the two different ways you can use flash for everything. You can use on camera or off camera. Off camera, like this, and like our next couple of images, is going to be much more consistent. So you've got that image from a completely different year. You've got this image that's Cosplay Dad or Cosplay Dad Cosplay on Instagram, doing the wonderful Matthew Patel from Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And the very next day at that same con, so I had packed up my lights and then I had to reestablish them. That wonderful gender bent Wonder Woman, amazing armored cosplay, it's just fantastic. Exactly the same spot. One day later, but that cosplay dad and the Wonka group are the exact same spot over 2 different years, and in the case of Cosplay Dad and the Wonder Woman gender bend, 2 different days of the same con. So consistency. You can see how consistent these images are. And for me, for what I do, I take photos to go into galleries that go up on our website, nerdcaliber.com. Consistency is really important. It allows me to process these images really fast. I don't have to do an awful lot of tweaking of individual blocks or sets because I'm not shooting within different lighting conditions inside a showroom floor, outside in the lobby, outside in the sun, what have you. It's all consistent because I'm controlling all the lighting, or most of the lighting. I think, go back to that Wonder Woman shot. I think it was sunnier this day, and behind the partition wall that I'm sitting in front of, and then there's a hallway, and then there are windows out to the outside along that hallway. So I'm thinking I'm getting a little bit more available light into this, and that's why it's a little bit brighter. It could very well have been that I just, set the exposure a little bit brighter. So when you're doing on camera, you're able to be more mobile than this. And I've got a couple of examples of how that mobility plays out and why you need to be thinking even more creatively when you're mobile as to how and where you're aiming your flash, basically. So the next example, this was a very, very early Rhode Island Comic-Con. It might have been the first or maybe the second. And of course, this is from Helsing. You've got Alucard, Mars Lee, although I don't know if they're on Facebook anymore, and Haruvamp as the character whose name I can never remember, but is the one being strangled. So, funny thing, Mars is actually pretty tall, but not that tall. Haruvamp is standing on a really thin, maybe 3 or 4 inch ledge around this support column in a parking garage for the Providence Place Mall right next to the Rhode Island Convention Center. And because of that, I was able to get this angle where it really does look like Alucard is strangling the character and holding, I think it's a him, up against this pillar. But the lighting here, you can see all of this space is this blown foam, insulation, whatever sort of stuff, super neutral gray on the ceiling. You can see it above Alucard's head, on the pillar. It's all that stuff. You're going to get some reflection off of it, and it's a neutral gray, so it's not going to color it, but it's not going to give a huge amount of bounce to your flash. Right above me, actually very slightly behind where I was standing for this shot, you can see in Haruvamp's glasses these long white strips. Those are the long fluorescent lights that are right above me, but that isn't the fluorescent light inside it you're seeing. That's the reflection of my flash at full power. So what I did is I aimed right into that. I mean, these strips are fairly wide when they're up there, which is at just slightly below. They hang about a foot under the height of where you can see the ceiling above Alucard's head. So I was bouncing into that strip to get as much of the reflective white surface, and it's designed to be a reflective surface to get as much light from the fluorescent light down, to get this light. And because of that, I got this fantastic light, but because it then also bounced around into all this gray, sort of neutral 15 or 20% gray stuff that's out there, covering all the surface areas, the shadows you can see are super, super soft. The shadow under Haruvamp's chin is really soft, and you're actually picking up the reflection somewhat of the glove that Alucard is wearing. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're doing shoots and you want to use bounce flash, you don't necessarily have to bounce off just a ceiling or a wall. You can bounce off a particular section of that or a particular thing that's on that ceiling or wall, if your aim is good. If you if you play pool or snooker, depending on where you're watching us from or watching me from, it helps a lot. If you understand bounce angles, you know, bouncing off the rail and playing pool, or things like that, it really helps, because it's the same thing. The light coming out of your flash is a straight line. There ain't enough gravity around here to curve it, so it's going to hit something and reflect off, assuming it's a flat surface, a pretty straight line. So it's pretty easy to figure out where the stuff is going to happen. So another example of this using the environment around you is this shot, which goes all the way back to 2012 at Connecticut, the Connecticut Convention Center in Hartford. Parafe Jose, and I don't understand what you're laughing at. VC, okay. So this is Bethany Maddock, the wonderful Bethany Maddock, the amazingly talented Bethany Maddock. And at this con, I just started the idea of kind of finding a spot. So I was seated out in the mezzanine floor, which is a big open space with a lot of glass. It's got the huge, multi-story glass windows that would be behind me where I was seated. But Bethany wanted to do a more in-depth sort of shoot than just getting a couple of pictures on a floor. And I said, at the time, I said, over there in this hallway, there is an art exhibit. And it's, as I recall, it was like Imperial Chinese vases. So what we're going to do is go over there and pretend that you're trying to steal some of this artwork that are in these glass cases, because there's a ceiling and a low ceiling, 10 feet at max. And the corridor itself was pretty narrow. It was maybe 12 feet wide. So in this case, I again had the flash on the camera, and if it was, this is the front, so I spun it. It was a different flash, but the same idea. And then I bent the head down a little bit, so that in this case, and back a little bit actually. So in this case, it's bouncing off of the corner point where the ceiling met the wall behind me, and in that direction. You can see basically in the direction of where Bethany is looking. So what that got me was this really soft light that was coming in from that corner. So you can see where the shadows are. I'm going to point to the picture and you can't tell. You can see the shadows right on the corner of the nose. You can see the shadows under the collar, but they're really, really soft. Super soft shadows because there was so much scattering of light from there. And I really like that. I also love the fact that while we were doing these shots of her like she's about to lift these glass cases off and so on, I happened to notice that there was this sign on the wall that said, "Please do not touch the artwork." I said, all right, we're going to have you over here, hands up against the wall as though you had just heard somebody's coming around the corner. You're about to be discovered right where it says, "Please do not touch the artwork." I thought that was pretty funny. But that was sort of a fortuitous, well, they're not fortuitous if you know what you're looking for. So I knew the artwork display was there. I knew Bethany was going to be doing a Catwoman. The signage here was fortuitous. I couldn't remember that was there. That was really cool. But I knew the kind of light I was going to get if I was bouncing inside that hallway. So once you start using this technique, you'll be able to look at a situation and go, hey, I can bounce off of that and the light will look like this. And this one is another good example of using available light plus flash bouncing off of a big surface. So this is Chocolate Ninja Cosplay and my cousin, Lady D Cosplay. Howdy, howdy. Obviously as characters from Suicide Squad, Deadshot, and Harley Quinn. And this facility that you're seeing is a place in Provincetown, Mass, way out at the end of the Cape Cod, called Whaler's Watch or Walk, Whaler's Walk. And it is a sort of a recreation of an old-fashioned mall, or what you would call a shopping arcade back in the day. And it runs from the street out to the beach, and about 3/4 or more way toward the beach, there's this open octagonal atrium that goes up all 3 stories, top of which is covered in a small glass dome. And when you get up to the 3rd floor, there are no shops, but there are these windows around, so you can get a greater view of the ocean and so on. So I had them stand there. In this case, I had another example of a human light stand, and this was Lady D's husband. And he's bouncing the flash off of the glass that's up above, angling it as far down towards the edge of the glass as he can get. So you're getting this, the flash is washing across from this direction slightly down. You can see that in the shadow of Harley's hair where it hits her face. It's actually below the line of the hair itself. And you've got a little bit of highlight from the windows coming in, and you can see how it actually creates a highlight along Chocolate Ninja's face and neck. So another example of I knew I wanted to shoot in there. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. I said, okay, let's go upstairs and see what we can do. We found the window light, and then I said, you know what, I can bounce off all of that glass up there. So I can get the light from the glass. I mean, that's coming in as well, but I'm clearly exposing for the available light to be pretty dark. I wanted the background to be darker than if I was just trying to shoot available light. And then set the flash settings appropriate to get, the fill light that I wanted. That's the other thing about using this flash. I shoot completely in manual. It's about time to talk about this. If you shoot in TTL, so through the lens automatic programmed method, the more you change how the light hits the subject, the less likely you are to get a proper exposure in TTL. So, if you just have the flash and you bring out the modifier or the bounce, you'll probably be close most of the times. You'll probably get one that's off, but you put another modifier on it, you're less likely to always have the exposure be correct using the computer inside the camera. Once you start bouncing off one spot but multiple reflections, forget it. So what I do is I will take the image that I want and expose for the background. So how do I want the background to look? I want the background to be kind of dark, even though it's a bright, you can see the blue sky behind them in the window. Even though it's a blue day, I don't want to use that available light. I want that background to be kind of dark. So then I had to do a couple of test shots to make sure that I got the setting on the power of the flash. And this flash does have power settings that go from 1/128th of power all the way up to full power. So I got the setting correct for the amount of light I wanted to then put on my subjects to give the proper main light exposure. That if you don't do manual, this is going to be challenging. Leslie, I'm glad you love Harley Quinn. I love Harley Quinn. I love my cousin. So that's a twofer for me. But if you are comfortable enough with using manual photography that you know how to expose to get a slightly dark image, like you deliberately want a slightly dark image instead of a slightly brighter image or perfectly exposed, just in this case just expose for the dark image and then adjust your flash off of where you're bouncing it until you get the kind of light you want on them. It's relatively simple. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. And this is absolutely one of my favorites. So this is the cosplayer ATK Power, and I pronounce it Power, but it's ATKPWR. I'm assuming it's ATK Power. Had this amazing Ari from League of Legends with LEDs, changeable light LEDs in the tail. And she wanted to get photos of it, and I said, all right, I think I've got an idea. So let's do this after the show floor closes. We're going to go up to the third floor of this was at PAX East 3 years ago, I think. We're going to go up to the third floor on the west side, where all of the outside corridors have floor-to-ceiling windows that wrap around. But you get up to the third floor and you get onto the west side, you're looking at the lights of Boston. So we're going to have the lights of Boston behind you, and I'm going to bounce off the ceiling. So the corridors have really, really high ceilings, probably 24 feet. But when you get close to the windows, these floor-to-ceiling windows, we say they go to ceiling because the ceilings here are like 10 feet, and it comes out probably a good 6 feet. So I put ATK up, fairly close to the window, but not too close, because I didn't want to see any of the reflection of the flash or her shadows if I was angling it too. So it was reasonably close so that the flash could be fairly straight up and down. But even still, you can see the soft light. She's got this classic, what they call the butterfly shadow under the nose. The light is the shadow is fairly strong under the lip and the chin, so you can see the light is coming almost straight up and straight back down at her. But I exposed to get the background of Boston. And you can see it's a little fuzzy bokeh, but there's some decent little bokeh going on there. The little fuzzy points of light. And to make sure that the tails lit up, and they were pretty bright, but if I had really cranked the flash up, it wouldn't have worked. And it did. There's a whole bunch of different colors in this whole set that I did of purple and blue and whatever. I just really like the green. The green matched the green of the undershirt bandeau top that she has perfectly. So I like that. So that's why I picked this one. The other reason why I picked this one, and this is just a cool story, bro, is that purple color wash that you can see it just off, behind the tails. That is actually the wonderfully talented and much, much more famous than I would ever be cosplay photographers Kay Hetton Elysium and Anna Fisher Cosplay Photography right behind me doing their photography up against a white wall where the windows behind ATK end and then the windows come along this side. It stops and then it cuts back into a wall. So Kay Hetton had his enormous, like 6 foot, 5 foot, or whatever it is, softbox. And then some other flashes that had, I think they were shooting through into umbrellas or through umbrellas, but they had colored gels on them. And one of them I think was set to optical because it was firing anytime I fired my flash, and that was the purple one. So I was getting this purple color background because it was reflecting off the window behind ATK, and I was like, well, I am fine with that. That's really cool. And after this, Anna actually needed another flash because they're all about 1 million lights. And I said, sure, here, borrow mine, go to town. So, I give Anna Fisher and Kay Hetton, some credit for this photo and, minor amount for whatever they did, where they were shooting with the cosplayers. And that's a great thing about cosplay photography at cons. Everybody helps everybody else. Or in my experience, I've never had anybody tell me no, and I've never told anybody no when I wasn't, actively using a piece of equipment. So now I actually got to go move my script along here. So one of the other reasons that using on camera is a little bit easier is why is this not? This should be up here 3 times, but so I'll jump ahead. Jennifer, hello, how you doing? Welcome to the show. So this is of course Jessica Nigri, and I'm going to explain this lighting setup because it was really intricate. But this is about the mobility. So when this was taken, the Javits Center at New York Comic Con, or where New York Comic Con takes place, was undergoing its massive reconstruction work. So there is a hallway that runs behind the connects the backside of the two big show floors that runs all the way behind the building. This year, they were letting people use that to get back and forth because a lot of the front of the building was under construction and it was a mess. Jennifer, thanks for being a fan. So I met Jessica at the time of our scheduled shoot at, I think she was signing at the, what is it, Xenoscope? I can't remember the name of the comic company. She was signing at their booth, and then when she was done, she said, okay, my booth is on the other side, but let's walk that way through the hallway, and I think there's this like kind of spot where we can get out of the way, where there's like a loading dock area. I was like, all right, cool, that works. So now I'll explain the lighting setup of this, but that's another part of the mobility. You can go where the cosplayer needs you to go if you're using on camera. I mean, you can do that too if you're using off camera on a light stand, but it's so much more of a pain in the butt to carry a light stand around, particularly at a con like New York Comic Con, where it's just crowded as all get out. Now, talking about the human light stand, I got a couple examples of that coming up. And the first one is this. This is, of course, a wonderful group of cosplayers doing the Pussycats from My Hero Academia. There's, again, Bethany Maddock in the red, Uki Spooky Cosplay in the yellow, Jiro Sensei in the blue, and Zerago, the wonderfully talented Zerago, who is an amazing musician and everything, in the front. So this was 2 years ago at another anime convention, small convention in New Hampshire that had traditionally for years been in Manchester, but that hotel got sold and was being renovated. So they had to move to a different hotel, which didn't have any of the wonderful locations to do the kind of shooting I normally do. This is right in their lobby. And it was the only place where there was enough seating and enough open space around the seating for me to grab a spot and then shoot cosplayers. So, and like an idiot, on the day that I shot this, I did not bring a fully charged, this is a rechargeable battery in here, I did not bring a fully charged battery or replacements for the other flash that I keep as a backup. So I was there with flash cord photography, Anthony, and Anthony had done a couple of the shoots that he had scheduled, and that was it. He was just sitting around and we were just talking all day while I was in between me taking pictures. But he had brought his very powerful Godox AD200. It's about twice the power of this thing, 1.65 or 7 or something like that. But it's way more powerful. But this is a Godox knockoff, so the transmitters that I use to use this off camera works on any Godox. Just have to set the right channels and I can use it. So, pardon me. A lot of talking. So, I had Anthony stand up holding his own flash. Now, this light, if you look at it, looks really forward and flat, almost as if I had a giant softbox shooting directly at them. But that's not the case. It was just one flash, and there was no modifier on the flash. The way we were getting the modification was slightly behind me and directly above me. The ceiling here had a really wide and fairly shallow oval dome inset into it. And it ran wider this way than this way. So what I had Anthony do is aim the flash into the side of the dome that would bounce toward the cosplayers. My thinking was that it was actually going to aim a little bit higher, but as it turns out, the dome was deep enough that if you aimed more towards the center, it would actually block some of the light coming back down, and you would get like a proper exposure at the leg level and then not enough at the top. It's really weird. So I had him angle it down so it was just aimed right at almost at the bottom of where this backside of this oval dome inset was. So the light was coming at a lot lower angle than I normally would when I'm bouncing off a ceiling. So that's why it looks a little bit flatter. But because this dome, this oval dome, is wider then the space that these cosplayers are taking up, it's super, super soft. Again, it's there's no harsh light here at all. It's almost as though, like I said, I had a gigantic softbox aiming right at them. That worked out really well for me for the rest of that day. I mean, I got a lot of really good shots using that Godox, that 80-200, and Anthony was a fantastic human light stand. So again, you find what works for you in the space that you're in, and rock and roll. The next example of that is, so this is taken at KatsuCon 2015, I think, maybe, and that is Gina B Cosplay, although I don't know if Gina has a page anymore. And this was a shoot that she wanted us to do. It was for both her and for the site. And so my human light stand in this case is my partner at Nerd Caliber, Manny. Manny is holding the flash in the hallway that's right behind me. So we are at the edge of a hallway that is at the level of the gazebo in the Gaylord at KatsuCon. Now, the reason it doesn't look like that is because there's a railing that runs all the way along this image that was right there. Her foot is resting on the railing of a glass. It's a brass railing of a glass-walled railing, so you don't fall off and drop 3 or 4 stories, wherever that is. And I took all of that out, in Photoshop, and it was a real pain in the ass, but the image looks great. So, so Manny is bouncing off of the white ceiling and a little bit of the wall directly behind me, slightly to my right shoulder, and you can see how soft that makes the shadows of her glove on her flank there. You can also see how some of the glass that's actually really there in the image is picking up a little bit of that light, and you're getting just a hint of a rim light that runs all the way along the bottom of her thigh as she's throwing that kick. So that worked out really well. And again, by having both the mobility of what would essentially be on camera and the off-camera ability of a human light stand instead of a regular light stand, it worked out very well. So the key is to get as close to a white thing that you're bouncing off of, ceiling, wall, whatever it is, as possible. Otherwise, you're going to pick up color in your images. So this is the cosplayer Amelia, with a lot of A's at the end. Obviously doing a Catwoman, and this was at the Free Comic Book Day costume contest at Double Midnight Comics in Manchester, New Hampshire, 3 years ago, I'm thinking. So this is in a at that time not leased building or storefront that was in the they're in an L-shaped plaza there in Manchester, and this was right at the corner of their top leg of the L, or bottom leg, however you want to look at it. And it was an old check cashing place. So their costume contest occasionally draws so many people that they moved it out of their store and rented this place. And some other business has gone in there now, so unfortunately they can't anymore. So it was enough of a big enough of space that I could actually bring my backdrop, stand and backdrops and studio lights and everything. So I set all that up. But because there was a window right behind me, the first year I had a black backdrop. It was rainy. It was just a miserable day outside. And so I was bouncing off of the window and the corner of where it met the white ceiling above. And those pictures came out great. This year I brought in a neutral gray. That is actually gray, folks, even though it looks like someone... hey, that's my LCS. Okay. someone who knows colors, I think that, gray with like a magenta is puce or what. Anyway, that's not gray. Although the thing itself is actually, the backdrop is completely neutral gray. The reason is that the walls of this place were this weird salmon pink color, which, from what I understand, is not uncommon in places like check cashing places because it's supposed to be a very calming color. And it makes people who might otherwise be upset about not getting the kind of money they expected out of their checks from doing bad things. It's also why there's like security walls, like bank teller glass, bulletproof glass right behind this backdrop. So on this year, it was a bright, bright sunny day, and I didn't adjust my exposure to account for that, so I'm getting reflection of the indirect sunlight bouncing off all of those salmon walls into this image. And this is basically straight out of JPEG. This hasn't gone through Lightroom or anything. I didn't do any adjustment on it. So that's why, one, the light is a little bit more flat than it would have been. In fact, you can see the reflection in her glasses. I just realized, or in her goggles. You can see exactly where the hot spot of the light is against the top of the window and a little bit of wall above it. But you can also see just a little bit of the pink wall at the edge of her goggle, and you can see a lot of the pink wall reflection in the other goggle from the wall on the other side. So you got to be careful about this sort of stuff. You got to pay attention to what else is coming in when you're bouncing light around, because you just have to go into Lightroom or Photoshop and adjust all this stuff, which I did before the gallery went up. So I'm going to go back to talking about angles and lighting. This is going to be tough to describe, so I'm going to do a lot of my hand stuff here. So again, Jessica Nigri took us to this loading dock. So the hallway, like most of the spaces in there, the ceiling is like 24 feet or something. It's enormous. But the loading dock is inset by about 6 feet, and it's got a normal height, like a 12-foot ceiling. And the walls in that ceiling are white. On this, on my right-hand side, which would be the side where the light is on this image of Jessica, there is an office, I would assume, for whoever manages this loading dock. And because I guess the office needs heat, there's probably a heating, an AC duct that comes in, creating a soffit that's at about 8 feet. So that soffit comes out about a foot from this far wall at about 8 feet, and then goes up to fill up the remainder of to the 12 feet. So there's a 4-foot wall that sticks out from the 8-foot wall below it and meets that 12-foot high white ceiling above. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I wonder if I can bounce off of that soffit wall, that elevated 4-foot wall, and get some of the ceiling and then come down and have that all wash in this direction across the cosplayer. So I set it up, and it was a real pain in the butt, and I'm going to show you why. And I took like the first test shot and just went, oh my god, that's exactly what I wanted. Literally exactly what I wanted. Plus the bonus of I didn't realize I was getting that little hotspot reflection right behind her hand. So it just worked out perfectly the way I saw it in my head. But the problem with having this, and this is on camera, I'm going to put my flash, I'm going to make it so I can put my flash on camera. I guess it would be helpful if I actually had like white camera bodies, or I wasn't wearing a black shirt, but sorry about that, folks. So the reason why this is a problem, so here's a camera, and if you're doing a vertical shot, how am I going to get the light that way? This can't go any further this way. The only way to do it is to turn the camera upside down. And this was what I was doing. Shutter's down here now, folks. So I'm holding the camera like this, trying to figure out where the shutter is. There it is. And getting the shots so that I could get it aimed over this way. That's one of the reasons why going off camera is way handier. Just because you can aim the light literally wherever you want. Now, it obviously worked out. It was a major pain in the butt, but it worked out. But that puts a lot of stress on your hot shoe. And in fact, my original body that this was shot on, the hot shoe is now too loose for me to put a flash in. So I'm going to have to get that fixed at some point. Because of things like this. Because of doing those weird angles. But it worked out great. I mean, obviously I got a decent image out of it. And I'm actually going to show you. So you can tell where the light path is on any image by looking at shadows. So if you look at the shadow at the end of that yellow line, if you look at the shadow of where her hair ends, then you draw a line to where the hair actually ends, and then continue that line in the direction it's going. That shows you where the primary light is coming from in this shot. It's coming from literally the corner of where that soffit wall was and the ceiling above her. And that's a trick you can do with any. If you look at a photo and go, gee, where did that light come from? If you can find a shadow and then something that's creating the shadow that's a little bit removed, you can just create a line that will show you right where that's at. Now I'm going to end this, wow, a lot longer than I thought. So I'm going to end this with two images that are, I think, a perfect example of how this can be combined to do two different things in almost exactly the same spot. So this image right here is the wonderful cosplay by Fempai, Fen Allard on Instagram, with this gender bent Deku, taken at PortCon, Maine 2 years ago. And my setup here at PortCon, Maine was there's a wall of windows right behind me. There is a lower ceiling that's about 8 feet above me that comes out about 3 or 4 feet. And then there's a much higher ceiling in the walkway, the coffee bar that's behind Fempai. So what I'm doing is I'm bouncing off of mostly the wall, or the glass wall, the window, and a little bit of the ceiling. But I'm doing mostly the wall because the ceiling, they are actually out past the ceiling. If they get too far past, any of that reflection coming down from the ceiling isn't even going to reach them at all. So you can see there's a little bit of downward light, and you can tell by the shadows under the chin, but it's also a fairly almost direct, slightly above me light coming off the windows. I've got my light stand behind me where I'm seated, and the flash is just bouncing right off of that, with that little diffuser grate pulled down to get a little extra softness. So if you look, that's the coffee bar behind Fempai, and you can tell because of the pattern in the bar that this next shot, actually I'm going to show you one more. Before I get to that, I'll show you. So if you look in the eyes, you can actually see the almost square reflection from the window slightly above her, because it's in the upper part of her pupil, that's coming down and hitting her, creating the light. This shot is less than 10 feet from where Fempai was standing. On the back side of that wall of booze is the back wall of the coffee cafe. Nature Sweet. Hi, how you doing? So actually where Fempai was standing, this is probably 6 feet distance. So this is Laurel Cosplay, and Laurel saw me on Saturday at some point after I'd taken the picture of Fempai, and said, hey, I'm doing this cosplay of number 5 from Umbrella Academy with Dolores, and I want to do it at the bar, because number 5 drinks. And I went, sure. Let's try to do it early so that there's not a big crowd at that point. But yeah, come on over and I'll set something up. So it had already been set up that morning, and I had taken a few pictures of people using that same reflect off the window lighting when Alluro came up, and I said, all right, let's do it. So they set up Dolores. They got their fake wine bottle, and so I just took my flash still on the light stand, and I set it up so that it is behind me and slightly behind Doris to the right. As you see, the hotspot on that is kind of on Dolores's head, but pretty close. And use that wash from the ceiling to get this shot. So you see, most of the shadows are pretty straight down, but also slightly behind where the image is looking. So we're not creating like any deep shadows underneath. I'm pointing the image, you can't see it, underneath Aluro's wrist, but you can see a lengthy shadow of the wine bottle on the bar, but also still a pretty soft shadow. So these two things, this shot and this shot, were taken within 6 feet of each other using two completely different ways of doing the bounce flash. One, a seated flash going, on a stand going against a reflective wall, in this case a window, and the other, bouncing just off a ceiling, getting the right angle to get the softer light down, but also washing across. And the images look, as far as the lighting goes, drastically different. And that's one of the great things about using bounce flash. Nature Suite. I don't know the answer to your question, Nature Suite. I don't recall. We've been doing our live streams, which we'll be doing again tomorrow, our Nerd News, for a long time. So I'm not sure. Devon Star, welcome to the show. I'm on your channel. Yes, you are. This is our channel, and you are in fact on it. If you mean you are on our channel in something we did an interview, awesome. That's cool. I'm glad. So that's it, pretty much, folks. That's one of the ways, or many of the ways. That's many of the ways that you can use bounce flash to get all sorts of interesting and creative lighting effects. And you subscribe, Devin. Thank you for subscribing. People, I never say this. Please like and subscribe. That's what you're supposed to say in YouTube. Please like and subscribe. Assuming you like and you want to subscribe. No pressure. So, once again, thank you for attending, for listening to me ramble for an hour, and I hope that those of you who were here looking for information about how to do these techniques got some sort of knowledge. We'll go out and test them out if we ever have a convention again. So hopefully, Captain Useless, did you hear about the Ezra Miller attack? I did not. Something I'm going to have to look up, apparently. Nature Suite, you're saying be right back. I am ending the broadcast, so take your time. So tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, is our Nerd Week Live. I haven't created the event yet, and I got to do that right after I'm done here. But do show up, and we'll talk about, as we always do, nerd news from the past week, and there's been a bunch of it. Not all of it COVID-19 related. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear a face mask now. That's a suggestion. It's a good suggestion. I go out with a face mask now all the time. It is not to protect me. It is, I don't know that I have this. I have no symptoms, but I could be an asymptomatic carrier. It's to protect anybody else from my breathing, my sneezing, my coughing, whatever. So stay safe, wash them hands, and hopefully we'll see a bunch of you tomorrow night. We're working on our next cosplay costumer profile. And if I can think of another really cool thing to talk about photography and flash and whatever, I'll do another one of these. So, good night. Bye-bye.